Welcome to the channel. In today's video, we will continue our read about a woman whose husband had a toxic mother and toxic jobless sister that demanded them to hand over their dream house for his sister's deadbeat husband and her 6 children. In case you haven't seen part 1, I recommend you to watch it in our channel to understand the story. Let us begin. Jacob and I saved our money meticulously and eventually bought a new house this year. It is our very first home, and as you can imagine, we were very excited about finally owning something this huge. His parents and Sarah did come to visit our place for a small housewarming celebration, and on that day, to avoid them, I visited my parents and spent some time with my family. Now, coming to the main issue, last month out of the blue, my mother-in-law called me. This was very unexpected since she and I have never talked with each other since the day I got married to Jacob. Surprisingly, she asked me casually about how I had been and how my life was going. I was a bit taken by her sudden interest, but I answered her questions regardless. Then she started asking how it felt to live in such a huge house when it was just me and Jacob. Her words stung because Jacob and I had been wanting to get pregnant for a long time, but due to some infertility issues, I was unable to get pregnant. Jacob knew about this, and although we mourned that we might never be able to have children of our own, we had eventually accepted it. I had told Jacob several times when I first found out the news that he was welcome to divorce me if he wanted to, so he could eventually marry someone else and have his own children. But Jacob had always stuck by me. He loved me and told me that it was okay for us to be childless as long as we had each other. Obviously, our families also knew about this, which is why my mother-in-law subtly commented about it. She then went on to inform me that my sister-in-law was pregnant. I was shocked to hear this, since this was going to be her 6th child. I had heard from Jacob how jobless her husband was, and didn't believe in using a condom, which would lead to these accidental pregnancies. Her partner was the epitome of laziness, and did nothing around the house to help her or the kids. I have heard from Jacob that he treats Sarah like his personal maid. He never even pays any bills around the house. Sarah works multiple part-time jobs while he spends the whole day gaming. Despite how much everyone has talked with her, Sarah never breaks up with him. My mother-in-law then continued saying that since Sarah could no longer afford to keep working throughout her pregnancy, she thought it would be a good idea for me and Jacob to give up our place since it was too big for a childless couple like us. I was taken aback by her demand and struggled to form words. I asked her if she was joking with me, but my mother-in-law went on to say that she was, in fact, very serious, and that Sarah and her husband deserved to live in a bigger house. But since she did not have space at her own house to let them move in, she had asked them to move in with us. The weight of this announcement hung in the air, and I found myself trying to compose my response amid the whirlwind of emotions that now enveloped me. I explained to her how this was our house, which we were still paying for. The notion of someone else moving in with us so abruptly, without even asking for our permission, was intrusive and ridiculous. However, my mother-in-law emphasized that she had already talked with Jacob, and he had agreed to this. This seemed bizarre, as Jacob and I always shared everything with each other, and I knew for sure that he would have definitely told me the news if he had agreed to let his sister and her family stay with us. I firmly told my mother-in-law that since the house belonged to both me and Jacob, he couldn't give permission all on his own without my consent. No one was allowed to live here with us without both of us agreeing to it. To compromise, I told her that I would be happy to host Sarah and her husband for a few days if that's what they wanted, but I wouldn't allow them to move in with me. My mother-in-law, on the other hand, started to yell at me that making space for my sister-in-law and her husband was expected of me as a dutiful daughter-in-law, and if I agreed to her demands, all our past issues would be forgiven. In anger, I replied to her, "Sure, I will be happy to let them have our place, but you see, we are still paying for this place, and I know that if Sarah and her husband move in, they won't be helping us with the mortgage or the bills. Hence, I think you should take some responsibility and help pay for Sarah, her husband, and her children to live in our house. I will be happy if you can pay just the mortgage for us, and we can cover the bills for everyone. I know that you won't be able to pay the mortgage with just the one job you have, so tell me, When are you getting a second job to pay off the debt? My mother-in-law, hearing this, erupted in a fit of rage, shouting and expressing her displeasure. She told me that it was ridiculous of me to ask her to pay the mortgage for us, and I retorted back that it was equally ridiculous for her to expect us to take care of Sarah's family and to let them move in. This pissed her off even more, and she continued to yell while I smiled in satisfaction. She disconnected the call when she realized that I wasn't going to give in to her demands. Soon after, my sister-in-law called, yelling at me for daring to ask her mother to pay our mortgage. She continued saying how she always knew that I was just a gold digger, and I told her that it was she who was being a gold digger for trying to live with us. I added that if she ever wanted to see who the real gold digger was, she needed to look at her own partner, who did nothing to help her out. This seemed to shut her up. I firmly told her that she could bicker with me all she wanted, but I was never allowing her family into our house unless they wanted to help us with our mortgage. She accused me of being heartless and prioritizing money over family. The tables had turned, and I felt relieved at the prospect of standing up for myself and not backing down, regaining control of my home. Update 1. Thank you to everyone who has shown their support for me. To answer the most important question that everyone keeps asking, why would my mother-in-law even demand such a ridiculous thing from us? It's because my mother-in-law has always been this entitled. Clearly, my husband has let this charade go on for far too long, and he and I need to sit down and have a serious talk about this. It's pathetic how my mother-in-law can lie about her own son just to get her own way. My sister-in-law is just a pawn in her play, who goes along with whatever her mommy wants, because my mother-in-law has always heavily favored my husband. Sarah just listens to whatever her mommy says in the hopes that my mother-in-law favors her as well. In this case, Sarah stood to gain from this situation since she could depend on us to pay for her bills and take care of her children while her worthless husband would do nothing. I am waiting for my husband to be back from his business trip so we can talk. I don't want to discuss this over the phone with him since it's too important. Update 2. It's been 3 days since my last update. As I had mentioned earlier, I was waiting for my husband to be back. When he returned, we could finally sit down and talk. I told him about how his mother had called me, demanding that we give up on our house for his sister and her family. Jacob was clearly taken aback hearing this, and I went on to tell him the entire story. He then confessed that he had no idea about all this, and that the only thing his mother had told him before he went on the trip was that his sister was pregnant. That's all he knew about the situation, and he had no idea that she would make such ridiculous demands. I told him firmly that I expected him to talk to my mother-in-law regarding this and deal with the situation since I can't handle his family, and he agreed. He called my mother-in-law in front of me and asked her why she had lied to me about him. Caught red-handed, my mother-in-law tried to backtrack, saying that she didn't exactly lie and that she knew he would have no problem with his sister living with us, so she had decided to take matters into her own hands and asked me directly. Jacob stopped her mid-sentence and asked her why she assumed that he would have no problem with Sarah and her entire family moving in. My mother-in-law told him that he and Sarah were close, so obviously that would mean that he would have liked to help her out by allowing her family to move in. Hearing this, I closed my eyes in frustration, but I kept my mouth shut since Jacob needed to handle his mother. My husband then firmly told her that there was no way that he was letting Sarah, her jobless husband, and her 6 children move in with us, and that she had no right to force us to take care of them. My mother-in-law started yelling that Sarah really needed someone at this point, but my husband told her that it wasn't our responsibility, and that if she wanted, then she should take care of Sarah. My mother-in-law then began to say how my father-in-law didn't want that, and that their house was too small. But we were living in such a huge house, so we could easily help out Sarah. She even went on to say that since I was childless anyway, I could help Sarah's kids, and this would make me feel fulfilled. My eyes widened in shock, but for the first time, I watched my husband's face change color. He yelled back at her that she had no right to say something so insensitive about me, and that she couldn't use that against me to force me to take care of Sarah's children. He continued telling her that my father-in-law rightfully didn't want anything to do with Sarah since she had become like a childbearing machine, and that he was done with the both of them. My mother-in-law tried to backtrack, but Jacob continued to yell at her that he had tried his best to have a good relationship with them, even after they had continuously disrespected me. But he couldn't take this anymore. My mother-in-law started begging him, but Jacob told her that this was our house and I was his wife, and anyone who disrespected me disrespected him as well and didn't deserve to stay in his life. With those final words, Jacob cut the call. Since then, he has had no contact with both Sarah and my mother-in-law. My father-in-law did call to talk to him, but after learning of the entire incident, he understood exactly why Jacob had taken such a drastic decision. My father-in-law talked and apologized to me on behalf of his wife, but I told him that it wasn't his fault anyway. Update 3. It's been an interesting 2 weeks. A lot of people suggested I install cameras around my place, just in case my mother-in-law and Sarah decided to show up and create a scene. So I did. I ordered them online and installed them all around my place. Well, as luck would have it, they did decide to show up last weekend, knocking on my door while I was all alone. When I saw that they were here from my camera, I called Jacob immediately and he said he was on his way. When I opened the door, there they were, my mother-in-law and Sarah looking furious. They demanded I let them in, but I stood my ground, refusing to allow them entry and telling them that if they had anything to talk about, they could talk to me from outside. My mother-in-law started yelling about how heartless I was, accusing me of being greedy and selfish. I calmly told her that this was our home and they had no right to barge in uninvited. My mother-in-law continued her tirade, unaware of the cameras capturing every moment. I calmly reminded her of our previous conversation, reiterating that I would not be giving up my home for Sarah and her husband, and that if she had anything further to talk about, she should wait for Jacob to come back home. Sarah, in turn, started to yell that I was breaking up the family for no reason, and that I was being too stubborn. She told me that not only was I a gold digger like she had always known, but now I was trying to take her brother away from them. I then informed them that whatever they were saying was being recorded on our cameras and that I would be using this evidence to get a restraining order against them. Their eyes widened in shock, and my mother-in-law yelled that I wouldn't dare to do that. I smirked at her and told her that if they didn't get out of our property this very minute, she would be receiving a legal order very soon. This scared them straight, and Sarah started to say how I was overreacting and that it wasn't a big deal. Fortunately, at this point, Jacob arrived. He walked towards us calmly and asked my mother-in-law what the Mayonnaise were doing there. My mother-in-law rushed to hug him, but he deflected her and asked her firmly again what she and Sarah were doing here. Sarah started to say that they knew that it was me who was trying to control his life by not letting him talk to them and that they had come here to confront me. I rolled my eyes at how absurd they both sounded. Jacob clarified to both of them that it was he who had made the decision to go no contact and that he did not want anything to do with either of them. My mother-in-law started to beg him at this point to forgive her, but he simply asked them to leave the property or he would have no choice but to call the police. Their eyes widened in shock. Clearly, both of them had not expected this reaction from him. Jacob went on to tell them that if they ever showed up at our house again, then he and I would be free to call the police on them and have them removed forcefully. They looked devastated, but Jacob didn't care anymore. I felt relieved that my husband was finally standing up for me. Eventually, both of them left, still fuming. Since then, Jacob has talked with my father-in-law, who was as shocked as us that my mother-in-law and Sarah had gone behind his back to show up at our house unannounced. He assured us that we were right not to let them in. He is also becoming increasingly frustrated with their behavior. I know that with Jacob being so firm about it and kicking them out, they will not dare set foot on our property ever again. If they do, well, I will contact a lawyer and send them a notice immediately. I'm glad that my husband has finally realized how toxic his family is, and hopefully they won't trouble us anymore so we can peacefully live our lives. I hope this is my last update since I want to move on from this situation as well. That's the end of this story. What do you guys think about this whole story? Let me know in the comment.